Ladies and gentlemen, from the very beginning of our lives, we are taught rules, standards, and measures by which to judge ourselves. We inherit expectations from family, absorb ideals from culture, and internalize the judgments of society. Slowly, without even realizing it, we begin to create invisible boundaries around our own being. We convince ourselves that certain emotions must be silenced, certain desires must be suppressed, and certain aspects of our personality must never see the light of day. These quiet denials, repeated over years, form the strongest chains a human soul can ever know. And yet, these chains are not forged by others. They are made by our own minds. They are self-imposed prisons, born out of fear, shame, and the constant need for approval. When a person says, "I cannot do this because they will disapprove," what truly holds them back is not the opinion of others, but the belief that such disapproval would strip away their worth. When someone hides their authentic self, what they are hiding from is not the world's rejection, but their own refusal to embrace who they are. The chains that bind us are woven from our own thoughts. I am not enough. I am too flawed. I must be different to be loved. These are not facts. They are illusions we have repeated so often that they begin to feel real. And because we believe them, we hand them the power to control us. The tragedy of these inner chains is that they are invisible. We walk through life appearing free, speaking of liberty, chasing opportunities, yet deep inside, we are tethered by the silent commands we whisper to ourselves. No one else holds the key. No one else fastens the lock. The bars of this prison are not made of iron. They are made of self, doubt, comparison, and the fear of being unworthy. And because we ourselves are the architects, the prison follows us wherever we go. But if we look closely, we begin to see that these chains have always been illusions. The opinions of others cannot define the essence of who we are unless we agree to hand them that power. Failure cannot make us unworthy unless we decide to interpret it as proof of inadequacy. The inner critic that mocks us is not the voice of truth. It is a fragment of our mind that learned to echo the judgments we once heard. In reality, nothing outside of us can confine us as much as our own refusal to accept ourselves. The chains that we feel pressing against our spirit are nothing more than the weight of our own resistance to being who we truly are. Freedom, then, is not granted from the outside. It is not dependent on others releasing us or society suddenly accepting us. Freedom is born the moment we stop tightening the chains with our own hands. It is born when we see that we do not have to prove our worth, that our flaws do not disqualify us from love, and that authenticity is not a danger but a liberation. The moment we turn inward and say, "I no longer consent to this prison," the locks begin to fall away. Consider the times you felt most alive. Were they not the moments when you allowed yourself to be authentic, when you laughed freely, when you spoke your truth, when you acted without the heavy weight of fear? Those moments are glimpses of what life looks like without chains. They are not rare accidents. They are signs of the freedom that is always available when you cease to fight yourself. The deepest truth is that no one has the power to chain your soul unless you agree to it. You may face judgment, criticism, and rejection, but these are passing winds. The true confinement comes only when you take those judgments and build them into walls around your heart. And because you are the one who builds them, you are also the one who can dismantle them. The strength to break free does not come from changing the world outside. It comes from reclaiming your power inside. In the end, the realization is both humbling and empowering. The chains we carry are of our own making. They are the illusions we accepted, the lies we repeated, the masks we wore for too long. Yet just as we created them, we can dissolve them. And when we do, we discover that freedom was never something to be earned or given. It was always our birthright, waiting behind the bars we unknowingly built. Every human being longs for wholeness, for a sense of inner harmony where all the fragmented parts of the self come together in unity. Yet when people think of wholeness, they often imagine purity, perfection, or a flawless state of being. They imagine a life without contradictions, without weakness, without struggle. But the truth is far deeper and more complex. Wholeness does not come from eliminating the darker aspects of our nature. It arises when we acknowledge them, embrace them, and integrate them into the totality of who we are. Within every person lives a polarity, light and shadow, strength and vulnerability, wisdom and ignorance, love and fear. The light is the part of us that we proudly display, our talents, our kindness, our courage, our successes. The shadow is everything we have hidden away, our fears, our anger, our insecurities, our failures, and our impulses that we believe are unacceptable. Many try to live only in the light, presenting a polished self to the world, carefully avoiding the darker truths within. But what is denied does not disappear. It waits, it festers, it influences from the unseen corners of the psyche. The shadow may seem threatening, but it is not the enemy. It is a teacher. It holds the parts of us that we abandoned in order to fit in, the emotions we suppressed to avoid rejection, the instincts we disowned to appear civilized. By rejecting the shadow, we become divided against ourselves. We wear masks of perfection, but behind them, the disowned self grows restless. The cost of this division is inner conflict, anxiety, and the persistent feeling that something vital is missing. To become whole, we must turn toward the shadow with courage. This does not mean acting out our darkest impulses or surrendering to them, but rather acknowledging their existence and understanding their message. Anger, for example, may carry the voice of unspoken boundaries. Fear may hold the wisdom of caution. Sadness may point to what we value most deeply. Even flaws and failures can reveal hidden strengths if we approach them with honesty instead of denial. When we make peace with these elements, they no longer control us from the dark. They become part of our conscious life, enriching our character with depth and authenticity. Wholeness is not the absence of shadow, but the integration of it. A person who knows only their light remains shallow, fragile, and overly dependent on appearances. But a person who has confronted their shadow walks with a grounded strength. They are not easily shaken by criticism because they have faced their own imperfections. They are not consumed by arrogance because they recognize their limitations. They live authentically without the exhausting burden of pretending to be flawless. Such a person radiates a freedom that comes from self-knowledge. Consider how many conflicts in the world arise from the refusal to face the shadow. Individuals project onto others what they cannot accept in themselves. They condemn, judge, and attack the very qualities they secretly fear exist within them. If each person took responsibility for their shadow, the world would see less hatred and more understanding. For when we accept our own darkness, we become more compassionate toward the struggles of others. We no longer need to hide behind judgment. We can meet others with empathy, knowing we share the same human complexity. This journey toward wholeness requires patience and humility. It means stepping into the uncomfortable spaces within, places we would rather avoid. Yet in those very places lies the treasure we seek. Our creativity, our passion, and our deepest wisdom often emerge from what we once rejected. The artist draws inspiration from sorrow. The leader finds resilience through failure. The healer discovers compassion through pain. The shadow, when embraced, becomes a source of power and authenticity. Wholeness is therefore not about becoming perfect. It is about becoming real. It is about holding the light and the shadow together without denying either. It is about recognizing that we are not one or the other, but both, and in that union lies our deepest strength. To be whole is to stand as a complete human being, capable of love and anger, joy and grief, confidence and doubt, yet rooted in the understanding that every part belongs. The day we stop rejecting our shadow is the day we stop being divided. And when the inner division ends, we experience a profound freedom, the freedom to live authentically, to connect deeply, and to walk through life with the strength of one who has nothing to hide. At the heart of human struggle lies a silent war, a war waged not against the world, but against ourselves. This war takes the form of inner conflict, the endless tug-of war between who we are and who we think we should be, between the face we show to the world and the truths we hide within. We yearn for peace, yet our minds often remain battlegrounds where judgment, guilt, shame, and self-doubt clash without end. The only way to end this exhausting struggle is through self-acceptance. the willingness to embrace ourselves as we truly are, without pretense, without denial, and without the constant demand to be something else. Inner conflict begins when we create divisions within ourselves. One part of us longs for authenticity, to speak, to act, to live freely. Another part whispers that this authenticity is too risky, too shameful, too unworthy of love. So we silence our truth, bury our desires, and wear masks of perfection. But what we suppress does not vanish, it fights to be seen. The result is a constant push and pull, a life lived with one foot in honesty and the other in fear. No external enemy could exhaust us as much as this hidden war does. Self-acceptance is the ceasefire. It is the moment we choose to stop fighting against ourselves. Instead of rejecting the parts of us that feel unworthy, we acknowledge them. Instead of punishing ourselves for imperfection, we allow ourselves to be human. This does not mean we abandon growth or change. It means we stop growing from a place of self-hatred and start evolving from a place of self-compassion. With acceptance, even our flaws become guides, teaching us patience, humility, and resilience. The illusion we carry is that rejecting ourselves will somehow push us toward improvement, that if we are harsh enough, critical enough, unrelenting enough, we will finally become who we are supposed to be. But this harshness only deepens the conflict. A person cannot heal under the whip of their own judgment. Change born from self-rejection is fragile. It collapses under pressure because it is fueled by fear. Only when we accept ourselves do we find the stability to grow with strength. Acceptance is not the end of progress. It is the foundation that makes genuine progress possible. Consider the way we speak to ourselves in failure. The inner critic shouts, "You are not enough. You should have done better. You are a disappointment." Each word sharpens the conflict, setting us against ourselves. But imagine if instead we said, "Yes, I failed, but this does not diminish my worth. This mistake carries lessons, and I am still whole despite it." This shift is not indulgence. It is healing. It transforms conflict into cooperation, allowing the self to move forward without carrying the burden of shame. When we accept ourselves, we also stop living in constant comparison. So many inner battles arise because we measure ourselves against others, chasing images of perfection that are neither real nor attainable. Self-acceptance ends this cycle, for it allows us to stand in our own truth without needing to compete. Peace emerges when we realize that our worth is not diminished by someone else's strength, nor is our value erased by another's success. The conflict fades when we no longer demand to be anyone but ourselves. This inner peace has profound effects on how we live and relate to others. A person at war with themselves often seeks validation from the outside, desperate for approval to silence the critic within. But no amount of external praise can calm an inner battle. When we accept ourselves, the need for constant validation dissolves. We no longer depend on others to tell us we are worthy, because we have already claimed that truth for ourselves. This independence liberates us to love more deeply, to connect more authentically, because our relationships are no longer burdened by the hidden plea for validation. Even our relationship with pain and difficulty changes through self-acceptance. Instead of resisting suffering with judgment, telling ourselves that we should not feel what we feel, we allow it to exist. Sadness, anger, and fear no longer need to be suppressed. They can be experienced, understood, and eventually transformed. This acceptance brings inner harmony, for conflict arises not from the presence of pain, but from our refusal to allow it. Ultimately, self-acceptance ends inner conflict because it reconciles the divided parts of the self. The mask and the hidden face merge. The critic and the wounded child find peace. The idealized version of who we should be softens into the reality of who we are. No longer torn between competing identities, we become whole, aligned, and free. The energy once wasted in self-rejection becomes available for living, creating, and loving. The deepest truth is this: no enemy outside of us can harm us as much as the enemy we become to ourselves. But once we accept who we are, that enemy dissolves. the battlefield falls silent, and in that silence, in that reconciliation, we find the inner peace we have been searching for all along. The human heart is sensitive to the gaze of others. From childhood, we learn to measure ourselves through the eyes of those around us, seeking approval from parents, teachers, friends, and later society at large. A smile of praise lifts us, while a word of criticism pierces deeply. This pattern becomes so ingrained that we often mistake external judgments for truth. We live with the constant fear of being evaluated, misunderstood, or rejected, forgetting that the power of these judgments lies not in their existence, but in the meaning we give them. When we accept ourselves fully, the sharp edges of judgment dull. What once had the power to wound us loses its hold, for no opinion can harm a soul that stands rooted in self-acceptance. The weight of judgment comes from the echo it finds inside us. When someone criticizes, it resonates only if there is already an inner voice agreeing with it. If we secretly believe we are inadequate, then a passing remark becomes a heavy chain. If we doubt our worth, even silence can feel like condemnation. This is why external voices feel so powerful, because they awaken the hidden conflict we carry within. The world's judgments pierce not because they are absolute, but because they strike the wounds we have not healed. Self-acceptance is the shield that renders those arrows harmless. When we accept ourselves, we no longer rely on others to define our worth. We no longer beg for approval to validate our existence. Criticism may still come, but it meets a different ground. It meets a person who knows their strengths, acknowledges their flaws, and embraces both as part of their wholeness. What judgment can destroy such a foundation? Words lose their sting when they do not strike against hidden shame. They pass like wind through open hands. This does not mean we become arrogant or dismissive of feedback. Self-acceptance is not defiance against all opinions, it is discernment. It gives us the strength to receive feedback without collapsing under it, to learn from criticism without letting it define us. The difference lies in the inner ground from which we listen. Without self-acceptance, every judgment feels like a threat to our very being. With self-acceptance, judgments become information useful at times, irrelevant at others, but never a measure of our value. Think of the masks we wear because of judgment. How often do people silence their voice, hide their passions, or betray their truth just to avoid disapproval? In doing so, they trade authenticity for acceptance, yet the acceptance they receive is never for who they truly are. It is for the mask. This cycle breeds emptiness, for living under judgment means living in exile from oneself. Self-acceptance breaks this cycle. When we no longer fear disapproval, we stop disguising our essence. We live openly, and the freedom of authenticity becomes far more valuable than the fragile safety of conformity. Consider, too, the way judgment divides relationships. When we are desperate for approval, we mold ourselves to please others, creating bonds built not on truth but on performance. Such bonds are fragile, for they depend on us constantly meeting someone else's conditions. But when we accept ourselves, we bring authenticity into our connections. We allow others to see us as we are, and in doing so, we invite genuine love, the kind that endures because it is based on truth, not illusion. Those who cannot accept us fall away, but those who remain are those who truly matter. Self-acceptance also transforms how we view our own judgments of others. Often, the harshness with which we judge ourselves becomes the lens through which we see the world. We project our insecurities outward, condemning in others what we secretly reject in ourselves. But as we soften toward our own imperfections, we soften toward the imperfections of others. Judgment loses power not only over us, but also within us. Compassion grows where once there was criticism, and empathy takes the place of comparison. The path is not easy. Accepting ourselves requires courage, for it asks us to stand bare before our own truth, without excuses or disguises. It means acknowledging the shadow as much as the light, our weaknesses as much as our gifts. Yet in this acceptance lies the liberation we seek. Once we embrace ourselves completely, the voices outside cannot dictate our worth. Judgment becomes background noise in a life directed from within. The profound freedom that arises is this: we realize that no one else's opinion has the authority to define us. We are not reduced by criticism, nor inflated by praise. We stand steady, rooted in the truth of who we are, and in that steadiness judgments, whether harsh or kind, lose their power to imprison us. They may pass by, but they no longer decide the course of our lives. The world will never be silent, and the voices of judgment will always exist, but you have the power to decide whether they will bind you or pass through you like whispers in the wind. The moment you accept yourself fully, with all your light and shadow, you become untouchable. No criticism can shatter you, no opinion can define you, and no judgment can chain you. That is the freedom of self-acceptance, and it is a freedom no one can ever take away. Thank you.